What's a Nightblade's favorite drink? Subtlety. What's going on, YouTube? This is the first in a new series that we're doing called Meta Set Report, where we break down meta sets for different types of content. First one we're doing is PvP, and this is how we're going to break it down. The first thing we're going to go over is Dishonorable Mentions. Why are we starting with Dishonorable Mentions? Well, that gets rid of any set that used to be S tier, high A tier, and now has been nerfed or is completely garbage, and I want to make sure that the information gets to you if you're reading a lot of written guides that this set that used to be fantastic is no longer fantastic. Then we're going to break down the top meta mythics. Then we're going to go into monster sets and then our traditional 5-piece sets and a couple miscellaneous sets such as arena weapons and so forth. We'll be doing this for other types of content. There'll be chapters below. We do very quick intro, so hit the like and subscribe button and let's jump into it. The first set that we're going to talk about in our dishonorable mentions is Iron Blood. You may still see Iron Blood recommended in sets pre-nerf. These would be from guides 2 to 3 plus years ago because it used to give you a flat damage decrease. You would take 30% less damage and then you could stack that with major and minor protection and other such named buffs. But now, these days, unfortunately, it just gives you a bunch of named buffs that you can get from other places. It comes from Falkreath Hold. It used to be a fantastic defense set, but now it's a dishonorable mention. Next up is a dishonorable mention is Mara's Balm. Now, to give some credit to this set, it is a dishonorable mention, but that's more so because it used to be an S tier set. Now I would say it's lucky to be in the B tier. Most people will probably put it in the C tier. It's not nearly as bad as Iron Blood, but basically, when a negative effect is removed from you, you restore a bunch of health. This can occur once every second. When you take damage and have 6 or more negative effects, you restore 1106 health per negative effect and then cleanse all of them. But it used to be this could occur every 15 seconds. Now it could has to occur every 30 seconds, making this set significantly nerfed from where it was. And you'll still see quite a few guides recommend this, even though this nerf was about 1 to 2 years ago. So just keep that in mind, that it's not as good as it was. And those are the dishonorable mentions that I wanted to mention for this video, just due to the simple fact that I still see them suggested everywhere. Next, we're going to break down Mythics. This is going to be in no particular order, and this is just a quick preview that all of these are in no particular order because, for example, how do you compare an S-tier bombing set versus an S-tier defense set? This is more so just a quick highlight as to what all of these things are good at and why you may want to build them into your sort of build. And in no particular order, let's jump into them. And the first mythic that we're going to break down is probably the most popularly used right now, and that is the Saint and the Seducer. While in combat, you gain 1 of 5 random major buffs, which changes every 10 seconds. Enemies within 12 meters of you gain 1 of 5 random minor debuffs, depending on which buff you have. The available effects are Major Berserk and Minor Maim, Major Resolve and Minor Breach, Major Force and Minor Brittle, Major Evasion and Minor Vulnerability, and Major Courage and Minor Cowardice. This is a great proc set that can give you all sorts of great buffs to go with your characters. Oftentimes, this is just one of those mythics that you can slap on. You don't even have to really keep track of it. It's going to continually give you really good buffs as you go. And importantly, too, it's also debuffing people in an area around you, which is also just very convenient. It's great for ball groups, it's great for individual play, and it's great for battlegrounds. Next up is Sea Serpent's Coil, probably the second most common mythic that you're going to see in the game, because while at full health you gain a 40% damage reduction after taking damage while at full health in combat, you gain Serpent's Rebuke for 10 seconds, snaring yourself by 40% and gaining both Major Berserk and Major Courage, increasing your damage done by 10% and your weapon and spell damage done by 430. This is actually a really great mythic. Notably, too, people sleep on the fact that it does, while at full health, give you a 40% damage reduction, which can be pretty helpful, especially because some people start off their combos by hitting you with like a Dawnbreaker, a Meteor, or other ultimates. So getting a damage reduction by 40% on an initial hit is helpful. Nightblade's coming out of stealth, trying to hit you with something very powerful in one shot. You're going to be 40% resistant. And you're also getting some really great buffs afterwards, meaning that you don't usually get Major Berserk and Major Courage. Those are 2 buffs you don't commonly see in a lot of PvP builds, but you can now build just to get yourself other buffs by having these ones here, giving yourself some really great proc damage, giving you, I would classify this primarily as an offensive set, even though your first hit is reduced by 40%, and overall, it's just a great mythic to use. Next, we have Death Dealer's Feat, because while in combat, you gain a stack of escalating feat every 2 seconds, up to a stack of 30, which increases each time your max stamina, health, and magicka by 88. When you are not in combat, this goes down once every 4 seconds. So, you can gain 30 additional stacks of magicka, health, and stamina by 88. It can give you quite a few resources, and because a lot of the health, magicka, and stamina is affected by other things, percent increases, you can build this out even further. This is a really great mythic if you're doing a stats build. For example, shields are affected by usually your total amount of magicka and your total amount of health. Well, guess what? You can get crazy amounts of health and magicka by getting this build, so you could almost classify this as a defensive set, or maybe even a sustain set, because now you're getting tons more resources as your fights go on. The extra stamina is also very helpful for magicka-based characters, because now you have additional roll dodges, you have the ability to block better, and you can sprint longer without having to worry about your stamina resource, which generally on a magicka user is significantly lower. This is my favorite mythic to run on a sorcerer. Not that the other two mythics can't be run on a sorcerer, but I think it pairs best with them, especially because they really do love their shield. With the rise of stat builds currently in Cyrodiil, you also see an increase in people using the Marken Ring. Now, the Marken Ring is probably one of the more least used good mythics currently in this meta, but you gain 100 weapon and spell damage and 1175 armor for every 3-piece set that you're wearing. You can easily build in a few 3-piece sets. In fact, if you're doing a max stat build, you can actually build in quite a few of them, at least 3, depending on the type of builds that you're doing, meaning that you'll gain 300 weapon and spell damage from unnamed buffs, which stack with any other buff that you're getting in the game, and you're going to be getting 3,400 and some odd armor to go with it, which is certainly nothing to scoff at, especially because unlike other mythics, there's really no drawback. You're just going to have these resources every time you have a 3-piece set equipped, and you've got multiple of them. While potentially a controversial pick to put on this list, we do have Oaken Soul. 1-bar builds are especially prevalent inside of Cyrodiil. They're very highly used in Battlegrounds as new players utilize the Oaken Soul ring to get into PvP with a bit more of a limited setup, and Oaken Soul keeps you on 1 bar, with the benefit of getting a bajillion buffs, which you can see on screen. I'm not going to read them all to you. You just want to make sure that if you're building an Oaken Soul-esque build, that you're not overstacking these buffs, because you can only get the same named buff once. You can have the minor and major version of it, but you can't have 2 majors of it. You're just wasting a major buff at that point. So Oaken Soul Ring is definitely still used, it's very popular, and it's definitely still got to be in the video. Next up, we have Gaze of Sithis, which has seen a significant decrease with the addition of the new mythics, but it's still a great starter mythic to get into the game. This is definitely more of an A-tier mythic versus an S-tier one, but it does give you a bunch of health, health recovery, and armor, with the trade-off that you can no longer block. So the benefits of this one is basically you can slap this on and get a bunch of defensive resources, health, and health recovery, and then you just have to get better at roll dodging, which some classes need to get better at anyway, because a lot of people don't like using well-fitted pieces, and they don't like roll dodging, and it's a great way to be able to use certain mythics like this. This, again, is definitely more of an A-tier mythic, but I still wanted to highlight it in this video, just because this is our first in this series. Next up from Balsanar, we have our first monster set. Now, this is the best sustained set for a monster set, in my opinion, because similar to Death Dealer's Feat, the longer that you are in combat, you're going to be increasing your health, stamina, and magicka recovery by 8. And similar to Death Dealer's Feat, as you are out of combat, you slowly lose those. But thankfully, you're pretty much always in combat in Cyrodiil, even if you're not in combat. Ain't that the truth? And as it's one piece, you get some stamina, magicka, and health recovery. This comes from Balsanar, which is in the Scribes of Fate DLC. And overall, it's just a great sustain monster set duo if you're interested in that. Next up, from Runes of Mazatoon, we have Mighty Chuden. Now, this gives 1 line of armor and a 2-piece of health and major resolve, increasing your physical and spell resistance by 59/48. I just want to note, though, that you can get major resolve from other places, so just keep that in mind. if you are playing a build in a rotation that's already giving you major resolve, this is obviously not going to be giving you the same effect, and either you may want to look at a different mythic, or you potentially want to look at a different skill. Overall, though, this is a great defensive monster set duo combo, and I think it's just a great option if you're looking for a solid defensive set to slap on the Head and Shoulders. Next up from Spindle Clutch 2 is Bloodspawn. Bloodspawn used to be the most popular monster set for pretty much every type of content in the game. It's been nerfed slightly and suffers from power creep where new monster sets kind of outshine it, but it's very simplistic. When you take damage, you have a 6% chance to generate 11 ultimate and increase your physical and spell resistance by 37-31 unnamed for 5 seconds, and this can occur once every 5 seconds. So it's got good uptime, it's got good reward every 6% chance you take damage, which may seem low, but you have to remember, you're going to take damage quite a lot inside of Cyrodiil, meaning this could be procced continuously. It's definitely benefits more from those larger scale fights or those types of content where you're taking more damage, but overall, being able to generate ultimate is great, and being able to get an unnamed defense buff is also great. Next up is Balorgs, which comes from the Wolf Hunter DLC in the March of Sacrifice dungeon. When you use an ultimate, you gain weapon and spell damage equal to the amount of total ultimate consumed, and physical and spell penetration equal to 23 times the amount of ultimate consumed for 12 seconds. So basically, you use an ultimate, you get tons of weapon and spell damage and physical and spell penetration. Yeah, for PvP, that's pretty good. You're using ultimates pretty frequently. Some classes use their ultimates more than others, but this is definitely a great option for tons of classes. And to start us off, we have Vicious Death, which is notably probably the most common, the most popular bombing set in the game because it gives you offensive penetration, and when you kill players, they violently explode and deal flame damage to those people nearby. This pairs very well with some other bombing sets that we're going to talk about later, but notably, I've actually seen people wear these on sets that aren't trying to bomb people because the offensive penetration and the 2 and 3 of weapon and spell and magicka can also pair really well just naturally on a lot of magicka characters, meaning that when you blow up somebody, you also just tend to deal damage to everybody else nearby, which is a pretty powerful tool, especially for overland Cyrodiil content. But if you just wanted to go full bombing, we just might as well just get Dark Convergence out of the way. You're going to see this a lot in Cyrodiil. If you've ever been sucked into a black hole, you're getting Dark Convergenced. It's still popular. That's why I got to talk about it second, because casting an ability that leaves an effect on the ground will create an area that amplifies a 60% snare and pulls enemies after a 1-second delay, stunning them for 1 second, and after 4 seconds the area explodes, dealing magicka damage to all enemies in the 10-meter area, and 1642 magicka damage to enemies within 3 meters of the center, increasing by 50% for each target. So it deals more damage basically to more people in the circle, which if you've played Cyrodiil, you've definitely noticed. This is just another PvP set similar to Vicious Death that you can get from the PvP vendors, and it's overall a great set. It's also a great set if you want to sell on the open market. Next up, we have Robes of the Hist, and the reason I wanted to highlight this one is it's actually seen as Mara's Balm kind of spiritual successor. This is a base game set from Shadowfen from the Overland, and after being hit by a disabling effect, immobilization, or snare, you heal for 2,000 health every 1 second for 5 seconds. This effect can apply once every second, but cannot be stacked. And if you've ever been to Cyrodiil before, or Battlegrounds, or any PvP content, you're going to be hit by any of those things quite often, and this is actually just a really nice passive heal. So overall, I'm a huge fan of the Hist set, and I think it's a great kind of spiritual successor, as I said, to Mara's Balm. If you were interested in that set, potentially look at this set. Next up, we have probably the most popular 5-piece set in the game right now, and that is Rallying Cry. Rallying Cry is a base game set that you can buy inside of Cyrodiil itself for those alliance points. When Battle Spirit is active, critically healing yourself or an ally causes you and 11 other group members within 12 meters to gain 300 weapon and spell damage, unnamed buff, and 1650 crit resistance for 20 seconds. Each group member, however, affected by this effect reduces the weapon and spell damage by 15 and crit resistance by 83, so the more people it affects, the less people benefit from it, and then this effect can occur once every 15 seconds. This is one of the most popular proc sets for PvP in the game. It's remained good for years now. I have no problem recommending this set. If you're in any sort of overland content, even battlegrounds, this is a great set to use. The weapon and spell damage being unnamed, as well as the crit resistance, make this one of the more popular sets to run for any type of PvP content, and I could definitely recommend it for you. Next up is a crafted set that you're going to see pretty frequently because while in combat, applying a major buff or debuff to a target grants you 260 magicka and stamina recovery for 15 seconds, and while in combat, applying a minor buff or debuff to a target grants you 130 magicka or stamina recovery. This is actually better than Roxa's, which is the monster set that we covered earlier. This obviously is a 5-piece set though, so you would hope that it would be higher. Personally, still, I don't think that you need quite as much sustain as this set is giving you over that monster set. But again, you might be wearing a mythic that takes up your head and shoulders pieces, or you're unable to fit in that monster set, or you just prefer a crafted set because it's easier to go out and get. And Wretched Vitality is an S, or at the very least a high A tier set when it comes to sustain. Next up, we just have a good generic defense set, and that comes from Hrothgar. That's Mark of the Pariah because you gain health, armor, and it increases your physical and spell resistance by up to 10,206 based on your missing health. It's just a good defensive set. It's not an S tier defensive set, but it's definitely in the A tier in my opinion. And it's one of the only real notable 5-piece defense sets that have stood the test of time, so we gotta highlight it. Next up, we have Stoon's Favor, which is a bit more niche because it requires you to deal damage to off-balance enemies, but it's a fun little crafted set that you can run, and if you're doing a lot of off-damage shenanigans, when you deal damage to an enemy who is off-balance, your offensive penetration is increased by 5,312 for 10 seconds, and its 2-piece and 4-piece are weapon and spell damage with a 3-piece of penetration. So you're getting tons of penetration for a nice little crafted set. Overall, this is great if you're using a set and build that runs a lot of off balance, especially if you're running a lot of those close quarters abilities on people. And this is definitely a great option to penetrate your enemies. Next up, we have Clever Alchemist, another crafted set, and this is a great one because not only does it give you 675 weapon and spell damage for 20 seconds every time you drink a potion, it also encourages you to drink potions, which some of you guys that watch me hate doing, notably David. Every time he drinks a potion, he just imagines gold leaving his pocket, hypothetically, even if he's using a tri-stat that he got in from a daily login reward. Clever Alchemist is probably one of the most common to use and popular proc sets, and notably its 2, 3, and 4 are really great for PvP. Health, and weapon and spell damage are some of the most important stats that you can really have on a character. So overall, it's a great set to use. Next up, a bit of a sleeper set that a lot of people aren't talking about, but if you go to Cyrodiil, you definitely feel it, and that is Way of Fire, because this set comes from Craglorn, so it's been out for a while, and when you deal damage with a weapon, you deal an additional 571 flame damage, and this effect can occur once every 2 seconds and scales off your higher weapon or spell damage. This is actually a pretty common, I would say, dueling set almost. It pairs really well into the current meta that we're seeing right now, and if you're looking for a set that you can easily pair into dealing damage with your weapon, you're just going to get extra free flame damage. And its 2, 3, and 4 of weapon and spell, stamina, and crit chance still pair pretty well with most PvP build setups. Next up is Scavenging Demise from Depths of Malatar. When you deal critical poison damage to an enemy, you summon a Scavenging Maw, which attacks your enemy after 2 seconds. This deals additional poison damage and notably inflicts minor vulnerability for 15 seconds, increasing their damage taken by 5%. This effect can occur once every 10 seconds. Ever since Calorians was nerfed, you've seen quite a bit of Scavenging Demise. I was a bit hesitant on if I wanted to put this into the meta report, but I do see it pretty frequently every time I go to Cyrodiil or even in Battlegrounds. Notably, this is pretty easy to dodge if you notice that something is growing behind you and it seems like it's about to attack you from behind. Perhaps you wish to roll dodge, because that's the easiest way that you can avoid the Scavenging Demise, and most players can get pretty good at dodging this, meaning that your 5-piece is not doing a whole lot of effect, but that doesn't take away from the fact that when it goes off, it's still a very powerful 5-piece. and notably too, a lot of the other Nightblade 5-piece sets have been nerfed. Next is Deadly Strike, which is just another great offensive set because increases the damage your damage over time and channel attacks do by 15%. Quite a few classes that use both damage over time and channeled attacks, and 15% unnamed is just a great damage increase to do for those. Next, we have Tarnished Nightmare. I do want to note that this currently in PTS is actually being tweaked, potentially to either lower the damage, give some sort of cue to dodge it, but I still want to highlight it because if you go to Cyrodiil, you're going to experience it quite a lot. You're going to hear it definitely, and you're definitely going to experience it. So this comes from Bedlam Vale, the dungeon, and when you deal critical damage to an enemy, glass shards burst within 8 meters of them, which is a huge AoE, dealing 1129 physical damage to enemies in the burst and applying the Sundered status effect. This can occur once every 8 seconds and scales off the higher of your weapon or spell damage. I just wanted to note this. I know this potentially could be nerfed into the ground, but it's still an extremely popular set, and if you go to Cyrodiil right now, you're going to experience it. Now, I want to now shift away from 5-piece sets to more of the miscellaneous sets. Now, what's the difference between a 5-piece set and a miscellaneous set? A miscellaneous set could be a 5-piece set, but you're probably not using it for its full 5-piece, or it's something like an arena weapon. Now, there are tons of good 5-piece sets in the game, and I really wanted to focus on the great ones. If there are additional great options that people highlight and people point out for update 43 and 44, I will make a pinned comment below that gives some additional ones and why you may want to use them. I originally wanted this video to be around 20 minutes, and unfortunately it's getting a little long due to how many good sets there are and information surrounding those sets. So let's quickly break down some other good sets that you may use not necessarily for their full effect. And yeah, the number one set that you're going to use not for its full effect is Trainee. Generally, if you're using a mythic, you fill in that other free slot that you're using to swap out for a monster set to turn into a trainee piece, because it gives you the most health for a one-piece set in the game. It's overall a great option. Most people wear it on the chest because the nice thing about trainees, it comes in light, medium, and heavy, but you can obviously get any piece of it that you would need to fit into your build. Another very popular thing that you're going to see quite often inside of Cyrodiil is the Perfected Wrath of Elements. This comes from Vatestrand Hollows, which is an arena, and this adds not only 1190 offensive penetration, but casting weakness to elements on a target within 15 meters of you causes a surge of elemental energy to tether you between you for 10 seconds. While the tether persists, they take 331 flame damage, shock damage, or frost damage every 1 second, which increases by 1% each time it deals damage up to 20%. So this is kind of like if Zons was a little bit easier to keep procced and also gave you some additional effects as well, which is why we didn't really highlight Zons. Zons can be very annoying to proc, and you're not going to see it as often these days, but you will see Wrath of Elements. Next up, we have Perfected Stinging Slashes. These have seen a bit of a nerf and a bit less utilization, but still want to highlight in our miscellaneous section here. You gain additional crit chance, and if you use Twin Slashes, you deal 209 more damage for each hit off the initial attack and bleed, and this scales off your weapon and spell damage. Overall, Twin Slashes are still pretty popularly used. This again has not seen as much utilization, but there's not as many arena weapons to highlight as you think that there would be, so I thought I'd throw it in here. And to wrap us off here, I want to give us some quick honorable mentions. First one is Plague Break, which is kind of like a Vicious Death alternative if you're interested in bombing. Crafty Alfiq, which just gives you tons of magicka, which comes from Northern Elsewhere. Mechanical Accruity, which is a great crafted set. When you deal non-critical damage, you gain a stack of Mechanical Accruity for 4 seconds, granting you a 20% critical strike chance per stack up to once every 1 second and stacking up to 5 times. Upon reaching max stacks or after the effect ends, it cannot occur for 25 more seconds. Basically, you just have a really high crit chance and you can do some great damage output with that. Drogakin, which increases your damage done by 330, but you reduce your healing received by 10%. This comes from Unhallowed Grave. Stonekeeper, which comes from Frostvault, which notably gives you, as a one-piece, health, magicka, and stamina. Falcon Scoria, which some piece wear as a one-piece to get additional offensive penetration, but some people also want to lob meteors at other players. Druid's Braid, because some people, if they have 2 slots open, they'll wear both Trainee and Druids just to get a straight double health bonus from a 1-piece. Slime Crawl, because it's 1-piece, could give you a really good, in fact, the highest crit chance for a 1-piece, or its 2-piece gives you Minor Berserk at all times. Marsalok from Lair Marsalok, which gives you a 1-piece stamina, but it's 2-piece. When you deal damage with a heavy attack, you spew a Cone of Corruption, dealing disease damage, and this damage is increased by 10% for each negative effect on an enemy, up to 300%. And Engine Guardian from Dark Shade Caverns too, because when you use an ability that costs resources, so pretty much anything, you have a 25% chance to summon a Dwemer to restore 550 stamina or magicka, or 1955 health to you every half second for 6 seconds. But everyone, thank you guys so much again for watching. If you have any feedback on this series, let me know, because I really wanted to limit this to great and excellent sets, but I felt like there were still some good sets that could argue to be great in certain builds, so that's what I included there at the end. I want to make sure that this series is refined without providing too much information, but also doesn't miss out on any information. So any feedback, put them in the comments below. Any set suggestions that you think are great or excellent, put them in the comments below, and I'll catch you guys next time. Before we go, though, we're doing our 3 giveaway drawing. All you have to do to enter is leave a comments below. Second thing is just be subscribed, and if you want 2 additional drawings on that one, follow on Twitch and Twitter. And the third thing is look for a hidden word to be flashed upon the screen. If you're the first person to comment that word, you will win. Thank you guys for putting up for me in a longer video, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye, guys.
You better remember to like and subscribe to Jakeclips. Or you should. I might have to pluck your eyes if you don't. Or, better yet, I'll skip rope with your entrails. Do it now. Subscribe. Ta-ta. Off with you.